Hi everyone. As you know, I'm Professor Stan of the Protégé Project, and I'm sending this message to you on Sunday, May the 17th in COVID lockdown. And I want to send out much love, much blessings, and much peace, also from Nicole and Shane to you and your families in this time. And we know things are not easy right now, so I hope you're all keeping safe and keeping well and keeping together, because of course family and communities and collectivities and defending each other along those lines is what it's all about right now, right? Defending each other as collectives and as families and as communities, right? So what I thought I would do, I know that your teacher and my good friend Nick Alok is going to send this out to you, and I thought I would read a couple of works, a couple of books, a couple of picture books, and I thought what I would do is read something different and something you hadn't read before, but I think I'm going to go back to, at least for one, reading Yo Yes by Chris Rashka, right? And I wanted just to say something then. I'm thinking in my mind about self-defense and community and collectivities and families and defending each other along those in that line, along those lines. Yeah. And how do we do that, right? Maybe what does that look like? And it seems to me when I think about myself that I've been. I'm a professor now, I'm a professor at the U of T, and it seems to me though that I've been practicing and taking up self-defense and defending myself all of my life. I haven't said too much about myself. When lockdown came, we didn't have a chance to get back into the classroom, and if we had done that, we would have started to speak about ourselves. Yeah. To tell our stories, yeah, how we come to be where we are right now, and who our families are, right, and where do our families come from, and what has been their experiences, yeah, our identities, yeah. So when I say self-defense, I've defended myself against bullying all my life, really from the get-go. When I was a child, I was made homeless. I had to experience poverty, sleeping on the streets with my mother. My father was from the Caribbean and went back to the Caribbean. I was born in England, went back to the Caribbean before I was born, and my mother was left. My mother was poor. My mother could not get any work. My mother moved with myself from one shelter, homeless shelter, to another, and eventually, along those lines, the local services, the Children's Aid, scooped me up and put me into foster homes, and then put me into various other homes where I was forced to sleep and stay for months and months and months without my mother, without any family members, and that was hard on me. And those places were very cruel. Those places were very violent. Yeah. So I experienced then racism, I experienced bullying, I experienced homelessness, I experienced loneliness, I experienced sexism, and I began to understand later on in life what all of those things together, what they meant, you know, how they operated, yeah. How they, who was the cause of them, yeah, and what was the cause of them. And that's how I became now, starting first of all to defend myself with just myself, defend myself and my mother. My mother also defended me. She would shout down people, she would put her body in the way of people who were trying to hurt me or do harm to me. And then I began to understand how it is important then to defend our communities, right? to defend my family, right, and to fight social injustice, right. So it meant that if I was going to defend myself and my family and my communities, I had to find everything I could. I had to find everything out about how injustice, right, talked, talked, right, how it talked along the lines of homophobia, sexism, ableism against folks with disabilities, and racism, right, and against folks who were working class and poor, right. And when I did that, and when I began to work on that, right, it meant that also I was educating myself as well, right? Beginning to educate myself in ways in which, I could then move on, right, and continue to oppose injustice, right, and defend as many folks as possible that I could, not only my communities, but also those collectives and those communities and those families who were also on the front lines, right, of injustice, right. And so that's what I've been doing is doing self-defense all of these years. So for me, when I read Yo Yes, and I know I've read this to you before, and I'm going to read it again, but I want to break it down a little bit. For me, self-defense is all about this book and all about this story. So let's read it a little bit, right? So Yo Yes, right? Chris Rashka. So Yo Yes, begins with Yo Yes, yes. Chris Rashka says this is for my parents. And what I want to do is I want to ask you some questions, right? I'm going to give some names to our friends here, right? So I'm going to name our friend and our comrade and our colleague here, Z, and I'm going to name our friend here, T. So we got Z and T, right? And I want to ask you, right? What is their story? What's going on here, right? What's going on here with Z, and what's going on here with T right now, right? Because I see a lot of myself in both of these characters, in both of these friends, right? You just look at the way in which, Z, is crossing his arms, right? You look at the way Z has his eyes down, right? A smile on Z's face. And then you look at T, right? You look at the way each one of our friends are dressed, right? And you wonder, right, so what is the story, right? What's going on in this moment, right? So, next picture, again, so what's going on here, Tell me about the story that's going on in this picture, right? Or tell your teacher, look, right, or let's think about it, right? So you have Z, yo, big letters, yo, right, and then you have T here, small yes, yes, and then you look at each one, right? You look at T here, you see two folks here, right? Both of them are different, right? Both of them, signal to us, right? Tell a story of difference, yeah? You see the way in which T is dressed here. You see Z here, Both of them completely different, it seems, right? And you have this big space in the middle, yeah. Also culturally, things may be different. So let's think about this, right? Bring up some questions maybe, right? About difference and the way in which difference also can look, other ways in which difference can look, right? So you look at the way in which T stands, you look at the way in which Z stands, right? Smallness here as well. But I think for me, I had a lot, right, of T in me, right? I felt small. Bullying made me feel small, and racism made me feel small, right? The way I dressed wasn't the same, wasn't what everybody wanted. When I came out of some of the places that I'd been placed in as a child, I would go into schools, and I would be the one who was bullied, right? I would be the one who was being told how to be, right? I was being the one who was told, you are not right, you are wrong, right? We don't want you here, this is no place for people who look like you, right? Racism came out, asking me questions about where I was from, etc. All of those made me feel smaller and smaller, We couldn't afford clothes either, so I came with basically barely rags on my feet, on my body, picked on both by teachers and also both by students. So it was a very lonely, very scary, and a very brutal, time for me. But I was also Z, right? I wouldn't take any garbage, right? I was small, but when it came to it, I would hold myself out, right? But take a look at Z here, right? And it reminds me of myself. I would go out and want friends, right? But I wasn't going to put myself out. So you see, Z's eyes are down there like that, Z has been maybe rejected for so many times, right? By racism all over the place, right? But Z is also kind, Z also wants to throw out his hands and say, look, you want to be a friend of mine, right? But again, you see, maybe we see something between this space here that says something is telling each one of them that maybe, we can't be friends because of who we are, because of our difference, right? But maybe you see another story. You tell me, right? You tell your teacher, right? So let's go on to the next page. Right? So what do we see? Yeah, Z then is putting himself out. Hey, you see again, a small lettering here with T. We see how nervous T is, how careful the T is here. But you also see, there's some carefulness here with Z here too. You see Z still hasn't got his eyes open, right? Right? Again, you see some carefulness and caution here, right? Both careful, each one of them. All friends, both very, very careful here, right? And that gap, that big space here still. Right? So, hey, who? And then you take a look, tell me the story, what's going on here, right? Look at the way in which each one, Z and T's body is positioned. You look now at T here, right? And remember what I said is, for me, I see both of myself, right? In both Z and T, right? And that could be how you see them, right? And again, what we want to talk about here is, difference, right? You tell us, right? You tell us what difference looks like to you also, right? So, hey, T, who? Question mark. Who? You. Z now has his eyes open, right? Z's looking straight at T, right? And then T, again, that experience of hurt, of harm, right? It looks like in T's life, nobody wants to know T, right? And it looks like to me that, with Z is very, very cautious because Z has had to experience pain, right? Had to experience racism, had to experience harm, right? Just the way in which, go back here, somebody like T walks right past Z like that. How many times, has Z experienced that, right? What does that look like in our world, right now, right? Is it a reality? Yes. Tell us about that then. Maybe we can talk about this then. And maybe we can tell our own stories, right. So here we go again. We go back. Hey, who, right? You, me? Me? Again, we have this gap here. Does it look like, again, both of them being told perhaps by something out there that they cannot be friends, right? Right? Both of them, the two of them, because of their difference, maybe, yeah? Yes, you! Z's eyes are wide open now, both of them looking at each other. Oh! That gap is getting smaller, yeah? That gap, that space between them is getting smaller. Arms out now, right? T, hands down, right? Less defensive, less cautious, perhaps, right? Oh! What's up? Not much. Z's got a smile on his face now. T's now is sort of now beginning maybe to relax his defenses, right? Again though, not much, coming out. Size, voice is getting the same, right? His voice is getting bigger now, right? Voice is getting less defensive. Voice is getting more trusting. Yeah. Why? Gap getting smaller. Yeah. No fun. Now we begin to think. Now T is starting to tell his story, right? Z is also beginning to trust, bring a little trust here, right? Gap getting smaller, right? Oh! Question mark. No friends. Very, very small, no friends, right? The body gets smaller and smaller. Oh, no friends. So what does that do? This is what injustice does to us. This is what bullying does to us. This is what working, when our families, my mother having to work when we lived on the streets, having to work for cleaning people's homes for barely any money, having to work sometimes being evicted as we were one time. I remember one time in the winter when I was about 8, everything around you made you feel smaller and smaller and smaller, right? And Z, because Z has also experienced this every day, Z is beginning to say, beginning to move towards understanding, sending out an understanding that Z understands this, that I understand where you're coming from. Maybe you have something different though, right? Maybe you have another story that it can be told that's happening between the two of them, right? But with this, right? This is what everyday oppression does to you, right? This is what everyday racism did to me, right? So we ask ourselves, then where does this come from, right? If we want to educate ourselves, right? If we want to defend ourselves, right? We've got to think about where this whole thing comes from, right? Who is telling us these stories that we are less than who we are, right? That we are small, right? That we cannot do this and we cannot do that, right? Where is it coming from that creates this huge gap between ourselves? It tells us, we cannot be friends, right? We can't be a part of each other, right? Where does that come from, right? Oh, yes, small and smaller, right? T's body is breaking down, right? Oh! And Z is also beginning to understand, yes, you can see where T's coming from, yeah? T's coming from a kind of space that also Z understands, Z knows, right, and more, right? Yeah, for sure. Look! See how that gap gets smaller? Yeah? Now here we begin. This to me is interesting, right? Because now all of those stories that have told that have told them, the two of them, because of their difference, cannot be friends. Now, suddenly now gradually, both Z and both T are starting to say, no, starting to reject it, starting to refuse it. No. They're starting to come together and ignore what they've been told about themselves and about each other, right? Me! You! Again, T's still not coming out, right? Z is becoming a little bit more trusting, but I still think Z is still being a little bit careful, but maybe again you have a different story, right? To this, right? Yes, me! You! The difficulty that T is having here, it's like, I've never been told that I can be a friend of you, right? I've never been told that, right? Z has experienced so much oppression, so much racism, so much injustice, The Z is also, is the first one here, it seems, to come out and say, yes, me, right? Well, both of them now. Well, again, where is the story coming from? The two of them cannot be friends, right? And I would say, right, this is because a lot of this to do with their own difference, right? A lot of this to do with race, right? A lot of this may be to do with issues of sexism, right? Issues of gender, disability, right? Homophobia, right? My brother, I remember, my brother, all of his life experienced homophobia, right? Had to experience being told, that he was not. Had to experience this everywhere my brother went, right? That he wasn't, the way he dressed, the way he moved, the job that he took wasn't the kind of job, or wasn't the kind of clothing, or the way he acted wasn't the way in which a real man acted, right? And that made him feel smaller and smaller, and hurt and wounded him, right? So we see, we get an understanding now why then it becomes absolutely critical, right? Whether we're in COVID-19 now, before and after and beyond all of this, right? And in our future, to continue to defend each other, right? From harm, from hurt, right? From injustice, right? Well, yes! The gap's smaller now, right? They're coming together, right? Coming to refuse. They've been told all of this time that yes, they cannot be together. They cannot come together. And now they're beginning to say, no, I refuse that, right? Yeah. Yo! Yes! Yow! This is power, right? This is how we defeat everything, right? By coming together, by defending each other, right? And this is how we come together in love. Yeah. So let me read this. Let me read this again. And I'll read it so you know how I've read it before. Okay? So everything I say, I want you to say, right? So if I say yo, I want you to say yo, right? Yo! I don't know about that. It didn't sound loud enough to me, okay? Let's do it again. Yo! Okay, that's a little bit, that's better. That's excellent, okay. All right, so here we go, okay. And I'm gonna I'll just perhaps move a little bit. No, I'm trying to move. Right, let me do this. I'm on a swivel chair right now, right? Yo! Yes? Hey! Who? You! Me? Yes, you! Oh! What's up? Not much. Why? No fun. Oh, no friends. Again, the size of T's body. Oh, yes. Look. Me. You. Yes, me. You. Well. Yes. Yo. Yes. Yow. And that last part, we refuse, to let you tell us how we're going to be, right? How we're going to act, who we want to be, what our identity is going to be, We are going to make that decision by ourselves, on our own, with our own selves as a family and as a collective, right? So yes, Chris Rashley. So, last one then. And I haven't read this before, right? So, I think I'm going to read this one. Oh, wrong way. So much, right? And again, this so much, and I think I'm reading this now because I think it's, I've always felt in times of moments of anxiety, that I was so alone that I needed to connect with family, with community. Family can be anything. You know, when I was a child, I didn't meet my father until I was like in my 20s. And so family was just me and my mother. And sometimes, you know, my mother wasn't there physically, but I knew my mother was around, right? You know. But when I'm feeling stressed or when I'm feeling anxieties, I'm always trying to put my pieces together, and I'm always want to think in my mind or touch family, right? Or think of family, or think of my connections with folks, think of my connections with my people, right? So I think what I'll do is I'm going to read, in this moment, I think I'm going to read so much to remind ourselves of the importance of community, to remind ourselves of the importance of collectivity, and to remind ourselves maybe what self-defense means, right? You know, self-defense means that we refuse as a family and as a collective and as communities to do harm to each other, to do harm to ourselves, right? And we think about that before COVID, and we think about that during COVID, and we think about that what we're going to do after, right? So we think about our futures, right? So self-defense, yeah. Refusing to be what somebody else or some other set of folks want us to be, tell us who we are, tell us how we should act. Self-defense is about making our own decisions, right? Deciding our own futures, right? And refusing, again, you know, to do harm to each other. And always then, what that means is then every time we do that, it means that we are practicing, if you like, right? You know, and singing and telling the story of love, right? Between ourselves, right? You know. So this is a reminder for me in terms of my own family, because my own family, we are all over the place. We are in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago, we are in the States, we're in the United Kingdom, and we are outside here, which I cannot get to right now, here in Canada, you know, up in offshore, etc. So I'm going to read this as a bit of a just something to bring back some hearts here, right? You know, some warmth, right? You know, some kind of connectedness, right? If you like, right? So much, and the words, and I haven't read this for maybe 15 years, right? It takes a lot of energy, so you know, I hope I'm okay with this. So the voices in here that I'm going to do are voices that come from my own family, you know, and that's the reminder of those who might perhaps have died. I mentioned my brother before. My brother's passed away now, but still very much in here, very much in here. These voices are memories of my own family, my own community. Right? So much. And this is a book by Trish Cook, and it's illustrated by Helen Oxenbury. And this is my reading for you, right? They weren't doing anything, Mum and the baby, nothing really. Then ding dong, woohoo! Mum looked at the door, the baby looked at Mum. It was Auntie Bibber. Auntie Bibber came inside with her arms out wide, and one big smile. Oh, she said, I want to squeeze him. I want to squeeze the baby. I want to squeeze him so much. And she sat the baby on her knee to play clap, clap, stamp your foot. And then she read him a book. They weren't doing anything, Mum and the baby and Auntie Bibber. Nothing really. Then ding dong. Hello, hello. Mum looked at the door. Auntie Bibber looked at the baby. The baby looked at Mum. It was Uncle Dee Dee.
Uncle Didi came inside with his eyes raised high, 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 and his lips scrunched up small, small, small. Hello, hello, he said. I want to kiss him. Oh, I want to kiss the baby. I want to kiss him so much. And he put the baby on his shoulder, and it felt shaky, shaky, and he flip-flapped him over till he nearly dropped him. Aye. They weren't doing anything. Mum and the baby and Auntie Baby and Uncle Didi, nothing really then. Ding dong! Yoo-hoo! Yoo-hoo! Mum looked at the door. Uncle Didi looked at Auntie Baby. Auntie Baby looked at the baby. The baby looked at Mum. It was Nanny! Nanny and Gran-Gran. Well, Nanny and Gran-Gran came inside with their handbags cocked up to one side and the brolly hooked up on their sleeve. Yoo-hoo! Yoo-hoo! They said, I want to eat him. I want to eat the baby. I want to eat him so much. And they hug him and they love him and they make him feel so cozy, singing songs and dancing till it's time for sleeping. They weren't doing anything. Mum and the baby and Auntie Baby and Uncle Didi and Nanny and Gran-Gran, nothing really then. Ding dong! Hey, pal pal! Mum looked at the door. Nanny looked at Gran-Gran. Gran-Gran looked at Uncle Didi. Uncle Didi looked at Auntie Baby. Auntie Baby looked at the baby. It was... Excuse me. Cousin! Cousin KK and Big Cousin Ross. Cousin KK came inside and he spun up his hat round and round. He'd do like he riding horsey. Giddy up, giddy up. Hey, pal, pal, he said. I want to fight him. I want to fight the baby. Yeah, I want to fight him so much. Oh. And they wrestle and they wrestle and he pushed the baby first and the baby hit him back and he gave the baby a pinch and the baby gave him a slap and they laugh and they laugh and they laugh. Oh. And the house was full, right? And they sit down there waiting for the next ding dong and they wait, but it never come. Mum said, is everybody all right? And the baby and cousin start to fight again. And Nanny and Gran-Gran take out cards and dominoes and Uncle Didi starts to slap them down on the table and Auntie Baby plays some records really loud and Mum said, what craziness all around? They weren't doing anything, Mum and the baby and Auntie Baby and Uncle Didi and Nanny and Gran-Gran and Cousin Katie, nothing really then. Ding dong, I'm home. And everybody stopped. And Mum picked the baby up and they all wait by the door. What were they waiting for? Surprise! Everybody said, Mum said, happy birthday, Daddy. And everybody joined in. You know what? It's actually my son's birthday today. Yeah. My son Stannis, it's his birthday today. And everybody joined in, right? Look at that. Take a look at that. And then Daddy rubbed the baby face against the whiskers on his chin and Mum brought in the food that she'd been cooking. Yeah. I always do that, right? And then everybody started to party. Ding a ding 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 a ding 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 a ding a ding 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 a ding 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 a ding ding a ding a ding 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 a ding ding daddy ding a ding ding daddy ding a ding 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 a ding 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 a ding ding. And everybody enjoyed the party. And when it was time for them to go and everybody tired, right? The baby wanted to play some more. But Mum said, but she put him to bed. And the baby's like, no. And the baby played, but baby didn't go to bed straight away. No. Baby's smart. Doesn't go to sleep straight away. Baby plays bounce with Ted, plays bounce in his crib, and he remembers everybody saying how they wanted to squeeze and how they wanted to kiss and eat and fight him. And you know why they wanted to do that? Yeah? Because they loved him so much. Okay. And that's the end of the story. Right? And maybe, we think about that now. Yeah? We think about that in this moment, right? Of how loving each other so much, in this moment and after, means that we defend each other, right? Means that we oppose anything that's going to harm us, right? And it's not just our communities, right? Not just our own communities. It's other communities of difference also, right? And when we work to defend each other, when we practice self-defense as a whole family, as a whole community, as a whole collective, right? Nothing can put us down, right? Nothing can make us feel small, right? Yeah. Nothing can keep us down, right? Nothing can deny us the future, right? That is ours, right? The future that is infinite, right? So we got to practice love between ourselves and love for ourselves. Okay. So I know I've stuttered a little bit, stumbled a little bit, right? But this is just my message sent out to you. But I want to ask you something, I want to pose those questions in your ears, right? Those questions that says, where does this come from, right? If those two, if both Z and T are feeling in some ways, or rather they've been told that they cannot be friends because of their difference, where is that coming from? Who or what is telling them that, right? So maybe we think about that, right? Take a look in our world around ourselves, right? Where is this coming from, right? Is it coming from books? Is it coming from television? Where else is it coming from? What else is making us feel small, right, in our world, right? Because we've got to see it and know it before we can confront it, right? Before we can overturn it, right? Before we can defend ourselves against it. And then the other questions about what's going on. What is the story of Z and T, right? Right? Perhaps we can come up with our own stories of what's going on between Z and T. Perhaps we can also come up with our own stories about different ways, right? Difference looks, right? And difference is, right? Right? Okay. Much peace, much love, much blessings to you all. And as you know, I'm from the Transitional Year Program, also the U of T, as well as the Prodigy Project. So I'm hoping, we will all connect with each other when this is all over. And I'm hoping that also Shane and Nicole are going to be sending you a message over the video as well before that. But we will consistently continue to keep in contact, right? Bye now. Much love.